So the man who won the Pan American Championship 3 or 4 weeks ago in searing heat and I guess humidity in Havana takes the field out of the stadium, and Steve Moneghetti is leading the rest. Australia's only gold medal at a World Championships has been in the marathon, in the very first one in Helsinki in 1983.
And of course the Kenyans missing both Waki Huri and Ibrahim Hussein, and it may be that the leading challenge from Africa will come from the Tanzanians, 2 of them prominent there, Rashani wearing 981 and Alfredo Shahanga wearing 983. We of course remember Gidama Shahanga. Well, this is his brother Alfredo representing them. And also look out for the Ethiopians. They haven't competed much in major marathons, but there's some good men there, led by 318 Tesfaye Dadi.
You can already see big crowds here. And if this cloud cover stays over, the marathoners are going to appreciate it. But you get the feeling it will break. We expected a typhoon here yesterday. It didn't quite arrive. We got the eye of it in the morning. And the 50-kilometre walkers really suffered. Blown about. It was very hot and very, very, very wet. And if anything, Peter, I think this is one of the best mornings we've had in the week and a half that we've been in Tokyo. It's not too bad at the moment. You get the feeling it's going to get hotter and hotter. At 6 a.m. or 5 minutes after 6 Tokyo time. They did bring this forward an hour so that they could run an hour earlier than the women.
Yep, it's good conditions at the moment. Of course, it's worrying. It does heat up remarkably quickly here. There's a certain amount of cloud cover, so the sun not really bursting through at the moment. But nonetheless, one looks at the humidity, and it's still 70%. So here's Alberto Cuba then. It'll be interesting to see how long he can manage to stay in the lead. The big pack with Steve Moneghetti prominent there. And of course, just as in the women's marathon, they've got to take drinks as often as they can throughout the race to avoid any dehydration. The main pack quite content, I think, to let Cuba go ahead and blaze a pace, which I think will probably be rather too much for him. He's opening up quite a gap, though, some 40 to 50 meters. Alberto Cuba, very aptly named indeed, but it is amazing to see him come back so quickly, having won the Pan American Games only earlier this month. And of course, the Cubans doing really well in that Pan American Games in their hometown of Havana. And I gather Fidel Castro was in the stadium virtually every day. Whenever he arrived, they won hosts of gold medals, and he was obviously delighted with that. But many of the Cubans, in fact, slightly shot their bolt at those championships, peaked too much on that occasion, and weren't really necessarily in preparation for the World Championships.
Nakayama, number 675, Japanese number 1 here. And he's leading the group that are following the Cuban, the number 1 from Cuba. There's Nakayama, 675, who has run very few major championships. He was first in the Asian Championships in 1986, the Asian Games, and 4th in the Olympic Marathon. Steve Moneghetti on the left of screen, 51. It's been interesting, Peter, to read the press in Tokyo about Nakayama, saying his disappointing performance in Seoul. Well, I guess relatively, but 4th in the Olympic Marathon behind Bourdin, Wakihuri and Sala, and in front of Moneghetti and Di Castella and Akenga. It's not a bad performance.
Well, it was a great performance, but there were very, very high expectations, of course. And, well, you know, in Asia, he was expected to do well. He didn't exactly collapse, and he's a fine competitor. He's now 31, though. One just slightly wonders whether he may be a little bit past his best. Won just 5 of his 12 marathons. But he's in good form. He won the Beppu Marathon early this year, one of their big races held every February. Looking back at that pack, most of the leading contenders, I think, are still in there. I can see the white cap of Bourdin in about 10th place. And another distinctive figure who was next to him was Pete Meyer, the big Canadian, who's always prominent in these leading races. Doesn't usually manage to stay there, but usually makes quite a name for him. The man who slimmed down from an 18 stone to a marathon runner. One of the most remarkable stories in world marathon running.
Shocked us all in, speaking of Pete Meyer, shocked us all in Rome in 1987 when he led for a long way in the race that Wakihuri made his big breakthrough in. The race that Bourdin and Steve Moneghetti came onto the track close together in the battle for the bronze medal. If we look at about 15:40, around about that for 5K, it's sort of around the 2:12, which is what I think you'd expect in this sort of conditions.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see whether... I mean, I think they are going a sensible pace. I mean, leaving aside Cuba, there's a big pack there, so clearly there's no one going to be stupid enough to go off on their own. It'd be rather like the women's marathon, a big pack, and then maybe dwindling down to an elite group by halfway stage and so on.
Well, Steve Moneghetti ran his last marathon about 11 months ago, and the man we just saw in front ran his about 4 weeks ago. There's Nakayama, who's in many ways, has tremendous pressure on him here, and the pressure is going to be hard to bear. High expectations for the Japanese runners. There's Monagiti, 51.
Also just inside on Nakayama's right-hand side is one of the Koreans, 729. That's Kim Wan-ki, and he's run a marathon in 2:11:34.
And 983 on Nakayama's left, as we leave them, is Alfredo Shahenga. So certainly one of the favourites, and two men with some credentials leading the main pack. So 675 Nakayama, Kim on his right, Alfredo Shahenga tucked in behind them, and you can see Steve Monagiti in about 8th or 9th place, well positioned in this main group. It's 976 by the look of it. And there's Bourdin, the Olympic champion and the man who's won the European Championship twice and was third in 1987 in the World Championship. So they've been going for about 9 minutes here in Tokyo, this World Athletics Championship Marathon. Australia with high hopes this morning with Steve Monagiti, and we'll be back in just a moment. And welcome back to Tokyo. That's Hiromi Taniguchi, one of the favourites here. 2:7:40 runner, 31 years of age. This is his first major championships. Hasn't competed at a World Championship, Olympic Games or Asian Games. Steve Monagiti on left of screen. So Cuba, number 220, has been reeled in by the main pack. On the right, Nakayama at 4K 12:32. Sala's in the lead group. Gelindo Bourdin, you can see with the hat on, the Olympic champion, and in many ways on form, the real favourite here. Can handle the heat, and he's back in about 15th or 16th placing. And Steve Monagiti, very prominent, number 51 in the green and gold shorts. And well, it's very early days. We're not at 5 kilometres yet. We're working up towards it, and Monagiti's made a good start. Taniguchi, the Japanese have 3 runners here. Taniguchi, Shinohara, who hasn't got as much form as the other two, and Nakayama. There's Cuba, Mekinen next to him, number 316. He's only 158 centimetres tall, Mekinen. And he's the second fastest man in the field from Ethiopia, in the green shirt there.
And the Japanese, of course, running very prominently here. They've got 675 Nakayama, 687 Taniguchi, 682 Shinohara, and there'll be great support for them. They come out of 4.4 kilometres. We're going to look out for the 5K time. 15:24 would be 2:10 pace. It'll be interesting to see how much they're inside or outside that. Kim of Korea, 729 on the right in the blue. He's also still prominent. Of course, most of the favourites still in that leading group. Bourdin in the white hat, and isn't that wonderful for a commentator that he wears a white hat and pick him out easily? He's content just to tag along at the back, and he usually does that and picks his way up through the field in the second half of the race.
So Steve Monagiti leading as we take a look at his major performances, number 51. And he hasn't run many marathons. They've all been well spaced, and there's been a plan to his marathon running and his preparation. His first one was in Edinburgh, the Commonwealth Games in 1986, when he ran third behind Rob Di Castella. He followed that up at the World Championships in Rome with a 4th placing behind Douglas Wakahiri, then 5th at the Olympic Games in Seoul, which equaled Rob Di Castella's performance in Los Angeles as the best by an Australian. 2nd in London, that was the first commercial marathon as such that he ran, but it was very competitive that year, with Wakahiri winning by 3 seconds and Monagiti defeating Sala by 3 seconds for second. Then went to Auckland in the Commonwealth Games, was second behind Wakahiri, and then went to Berlin later in 1990 and ran the fastest time of the year in 1990 at 2:8:16. He's run 2 marathons under 2:10 and 1 under 2:9. But in the majority of them, as you've seen, they've all been major championships or very highly competitive without pacemakers and manufactured for fast times, and his competitive record is outstanding. So Monagiti just tucked away in 2nd placing there. Haven't noticed the Soviet runner Tolsakov yet. I notice Peter is up there near the lead group, and we're about to get to the 5 kilometre point and should get our first split. So just roughly around 15:40 gives you about 2:12, something like that. And that's about the pace, Peter, I would have thought.
Yep, in these conditions, that's good time. There they are. Well, pretty well spot on, 15:36.
So Peter Meyer of Canada, 1:69 is the leader, as he did in Rome, as we go to a drink stop. Remember Steve in London in 1989 refusing not to take a drink, but this is a time that you must take one in the early stages of the run. He's very careful and absolutely fastidious about this, Peter. He makes sure that he gets his drink every time. There's Nakayama 6.75. So well prepared and organised, Monaghetti has been one of his great strengths, and you've got to say that over the years that his focus and his preparation and the people behind him have done a superb job.
Well, just look how much the runners are sweating already. They're only 5 kilometres into the race, but it's humid and the temperature will rise steadily throughout the 2 hours of the race.
League group, some of the names: Monaghetti, Nakayama, Cuba, Alfredo Shahanga, Peter Meyer, and Kim of Korea, who's a 2:11.34 runner. And Steve keeping out to himself, as he has done for part of this first 5 kilometres. Road surface is tremendous. The major rise in the race will come at about 36 kilometres and last for about 2.5 or 3. And Steve's already spoken to us on Friday night about his plans there. If he's running well, that's the time where you can make or break the opposition and yourself.
Quite a mixture of nationalities there, isn't it? There's Africans, Europeans, Steve himself, of course, from Australia. It's rather typical of these World Championships as a whole, where there's been so many nations prominent and so many nations winning medals. I think it was no less than about 15 countries have already had gold medals.
4:14, you might be able to notice it at the back of that group. He's holding a drink in his left hand, just having one, is Dave Buzzer, who ran his first marathon in London this year, and he's been living in Melbourne and training with a lot of Monaghetti's friends there. And this is his second marathon. He qualified by running 16th in London in 2:12.37. And Dave will also have some support back home in Australia. Not quite as much as Steve, of course, but he's made a lot of friends there, Peter, and took the surprising step of coming to Australia to prepare for this, because we were in the same time zone, certainly different weather conditions.
Well, I think it's good on him, because this is his really first chance at major international competition. He was a big surprise, really, to make the British team. Many of the top British runners not wanting to compete in these World Championships, thinking the conditions in Tokyo would be all against them, and preferring to race in the big money races like New York and Chicago later on in the year.
So Cuba still very prominent, number 220, with Nakayama alongside of him, and Steve Monaghetti off to the left of screen. Still taking in fluids, you notice. And as Peter mentioned 4 or 5 minutes ago, really sweating. In fact, the sun has now broken through. And we're sitting in the main stadium, and we're not doing much work, I can tell you, and the sweat's starting to pour off us. So you can imagine what it's like for the athletes here. At 6 kilometres, about 18:40, 18:41. And they're split up a bit here, which is what didn't happen in the women's race. So very much part of a group. Moto did go off to the left of our screen at one stage, and that was when a critical part of the race for her. But Nakayama on the right with Cuba and Monaghetti on the left. There's Nakayama, 6.75. Expect to see him when the pressure's on. Steve Monaghetti, great shot of him. Jörg Peter just behind him. The 34-year-old from Germany, formerly East Germany. He's run a number of his marathons here in Japan. There he is, 5:06, Jörg Peter. His big race record's not so good, though he did win a World Cup and European Cup on the track at 10,000 metres. It's going back a fair way in 1977.
Yeah, it is. He was a great track runner, really, and has given the track up and now concentrates on the marathon, and has got a long race record, really, though, you know, one may wonder whether his best days are past. Looked like he was retiring at one time. He came back, and of course I think many of the East Germans are now back in the sport. They can now for the first time run for money, and that's extending many of their careers.
It's Taniguchi, one of the other Japanese runners. Just got the feeling there that Nakayama was starting to stretch it a little with Cuba. Good shot there again of Monaghetti, and you can see Bourdin with a hat behind him.
Yes, it's stretching out. One or two people testing the space a bit, stretching away, and the group not staying together quite as much as one might have expected. The Tanzanians also pretty prominent still, 981 Murashini and 983 Shahanga.
Ethiopians together there. Ethiopians' most famous marathon, obviously, Abibi Bikila, who won the Olympic marathon here in 1964 after winning in Rome in 1960. See the Tokyo Dome on the right, big baseball stadium. They're baseball mad in Tokyo. have a number of games during the week and saturation coverage on television here. But this is one of their other very big television events, the marathon. And Nakayama and Cuba, who must have got away by about 10 metres at one stage, 15 metres, now very much back with the pack. 3:16 Mekinen and Jordan runner just behind them, 6:56. There's Bourdin. What a great competitor he's been and is. 32 years of age. He's run 5 marathons since November 1989. That might be just a little query on him. He ran a number of marathons in 1990. Number 479.
475, that's Konrad Dobler of Germany as well.
And that's Freigang there, who was
yeah.
behind Moneghetti in Berlin and won the World Student Championships this year at 10,000 metres. And we mentioned him earlier, Peter. He may be one that we haven't got a real form guide on for this event.
Nonetheless, a man who's run under 2:10 from a marathon and recently won a decent title in 28:10 for 10,000 metres. You've got to rate him.
Just notice 881 was Pinheiro of Portugal, who was 5th in London this year in the World Cup. Tremendous depth in this field, as you'd expect.
And there's Hiromi Taniguchi. We haven't seen so much of him taking the sponge there. The second Japanese also got a good race record, second in the Beijing Marathon in 1988 when he ran his best time of 2 hours, 7 minutes, 40 seconds. He's won the Tokyo Marathon on a couple of occasions, so he's well used to the streets of this great city.
And from one big Japanese hope to another in Nakayama. So Moneghetti tucked away. He's looking comfortable. He's in just the right spot that he'd want to be in. We'll be talking to Steve's coach and a man who's run at the Olympic Games in the marathon for Australia, Chris Wardlaw, very shortly. And I'll be interested, Peter, to ask Chris about Steve's race plan here. If somebody does try and make a break, considering the conditions, whether Steve's intent on getting to halfway in a certain time or whether or not he's going to cover every move.
Yeah, well, I'll leave that to Chris to speculate about.
So once again, 2:20, certainly in the picture. Cuba of Cuba, who won that Pan American Championship. His best is 2:15, but you couldn't seriously consider him. We have the official 5 kilometre split was 15:38. 15:38 for 5K, so on about 2:12 pace. Fastest ever is 2:650, but it was in the Call of Rotterdam in April. A very fast course. And there's Steve, who's got that De Castella trait of clearing the old nostrils and looks very, very comfortable. It looks like it might be Sala on the right of that group. He's the fastest man in this field, and as you can see them starting to work their way across to another drink station.
And look at the Ethiopians there. 3:16 Mekinen, 3:15 Giselasi. He's a newcomer to top international competition, and also 3:18 Tesfaye Dadi. They're all prominent, and the Ethiopians, of course, have got a great record in marathon running. They don't always come out too often, but when they do, look out for them. Talking of the Ethiopians reminds me I was in Cairo last year for the African Championships in October, and 3 Ethiopians won that race in about 2 hours 30, and that seems to be bad time. But I mean, Cairo, the conditions were absolutely awful. They had to go run up and down outside of cement works with dust in the air all round, and I think even the Ethiopians said it was the worst conditions they'd ever had. And they ran it in 2:30, and the coach said, well, that's equivalent to about 2:12, and that was the Ethiopian second strings, and they got the Ethiopian first strings very much here. Number 730, Kim Won-tak, of Korea, who last year won the Asian Championships in Seoul.
As we work our way back through the field. And at 9:60, we'll try and...
960 is Orca Eriksson, who won the Stockholm Marathon this year and was 4th in Chicago last year, 2:10.53, so he's pretty useful, and yet he's not staying quite with the leading pace.
Faustini was with him from Italy, who was 14th in London this year. There's Tolstakov, 1:08.3, who won the London Marathon and World Cup this year in a very fast time of 2:9.17. He has run 9 marathons since the World Championships in 1987. His World Championship record, or Major Championship record, is not good. He was 11th in Rome and then didn't finish in split at the European Championship. So board in with the hat as we work our way back towards the lead group. And we see Steve Moneghetti safely there in a group of about a dozen, about 15 or 20 metres in front of the next group led by Bourdin. And we'll be back in Tokyo very shortly. Just over 9 kilometres into the World Championship Marathon. There's the second group led by Gilindo Bourdin. Pinheiro's in that group. A Bourdin with a hat from Italy, the Olympic champion. And the man with the big race record here, 682 Shinohara of Japan. His best time is 2:12, and very much the third of the Japanese runners. And there's Steve Moneghetti. Well, in 1982, Steve ran 21st in the Australian Cross Country Championship. He began a liaison with his coach, Chris Wardlaw. Chris himself ran in 2 Olympic marathons in 76 and 80 and was a finalist in the 10,000 metres in Montreal, and he joins us now. Settled down yet, Chris?
It's a struggle, Bruce, but I'm sort of, you know, the first 5K wasn't too arduous, for me anyway.
We've noticed Steve running to the left of camera quite a bit on his own. Any reason for that?
We've got a bit of a theory that you should stay on the high side of the road. You tend to run against the camber otherwise, but he's probably wider than I would have thought, but he's just relaxing.
Well, I chatted to Peter a moment ago about Steve's tactics. If the pace was quickened and someone did get away, I mean, yeah. What's the theory behind that? What have you worked out?
Well, you know, we've got our ideal race plan, which basically really works at get to 30k and hope somebody picks it up a bit before the hill, gets people off the bit, and then Mono does it on the hill. That's the ideal race plan. But it's never like that. So Mono's a very intelligent guy, as you know, Bruce, and he'll be just working it through, and depends a hell of a lot on who it is. If it was Nakayama who took off,
yes, it would make a difference depending on who it was. I don't think this man will take off. Bourdin, you've looked through the field, Wakahiri not there, and you've mentioned that this man's going to be the man for Steve to beat, do you think?
Obviously, he's a great championship runner. He's run tremendously well in hot conditions. You look around for the guys that have run well in championships and in the heat, and because this is what this race is all about. Bourdin's the obvious one. I've got a lot of time for Nakayama. He ran 4th at Seoul, beat Mono. I think Mono's a better athlete than since then, or he definitely is.
Just saw Dave Buzzer a moment ago, who you've probably been running with,
yes.
in Melbourne.
Yeah, Dave came down, and he was here in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and he came down for the last 6 weeks. He's a good mate of ours and done a lot of running with our group, and he's hoping to make the Olympic team for Britain next year by running a good, solid, conservative race.
A couple of the Soviets together there. On the left, Tolsakov, the man with the very good form, winning in London, and I mentioned earlier, he's 32 years of age. He is going to run New York a little later this year, so you just wonder how focused he is. Now, yeah. 10K, so the split there was about 31, which is around about 2:11.5. Steve again getting his drink. Absolutely important, isn't it? I mean, you just can't miss a drink station here.
Yeah, it's fundamental that you've got to drink early. It's too late if you don't get them. And Mono would be spending a lot of time working out how to get his drink for these first 4 or 5 drink stations, and spending a lot of time trying to get the fluid down. He has about 200 mils in each container, but he can only get down about 100 mil each stop. It's just very, very difficult. Your whole system's under pressure. And while it may seem simple, why can't you just drink some stuff down? It's just not that easy, unfortunately, when you're running along at this pace.
And what will he be drinking today?
He's just got a small, I think it's XC mixture, about 2% solution. It's mainly water, though, really.
There's Bourdin, who's done this often before. You remember in the Olympic marathon when he was dropped off by Sala with the big breakaway and able to come back. So Moneghetti on the left, number 51. Nakayama next to him.
Bourdin's well and truly in contact. He's just drifting along there. The pace is nice and leisurely. It's, you know, they're rolling along at 2:12 pace, but I think the race will only be running about 2:11, 2:12. I just think the conditions are too oppressive to believe it'd be much faster than that. And Bourdin would know that. I'd be surprised if there's a move made before 20k. Very surprised, but you've just got to be ready for anything.
Well, Bourdin's major championship wins have all been pretty slow. There's 881. That's Pinheiro of Portugal, 5th in London, the World Cup. When he won in Stuttgart, he ran 2:10.54 in 1986 at the European Championships. He was 2:10.32 in Seoul and 2:14.02 in Split. So yeah. No world records there, but gee, a gold medal feels pretty good around your neck, doesn't it?
That's right. It can be 2:18 as far as I'm concerned.
Well, here's the temperature and humidity. 26 degrees. This is at 6:30 in the morning and 67% humidity. I also mentioned, Chris, before you came on air, that it's not nearly as humid as it was yesterday.
Yeah, well, 67% is pretty good. It might sound bad to some runners back in Melbourne, but that's about as good as it's been. It's been up 70, 80%. And so, you know, Mona, like anybody, worries about the conditions. And I think, you know, we were relatively happy at 6 a.m. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. You know, it could have been far more oppressive.
You mentioned Melbourne a moment ago, where you live. Steve lives in Ballarat. Was there any thought that he might go up to Brisbane or to Darwin or to any of these places to try and acclimatise for this race?
No, we have lots of radical theories on those things, Bruce. No, we believe in a very short acclimatisation and being at home, in his home environment. He loves Ballarat. He loves his training group. He's at home. He's got a whole support system. You get fit in the cool conditions, and then you come up and you're fit and strong, and he only tapers in the heat. And we think there's a bit of physiological and scientific evidence to back that, but empirically we believe it's the correct thing to do. We think a lot of people have worried far too much about acclimatisation.
Well, there's the face of the man who will defend his Olympic championship in Barcelona next year. And he's after his World Championship. He's got everything else now. This is the one that he hasn't got. He was third in Rome in 1987. I'm sure Chris that brought him would have loved to have won in his home cities. We go back to the lead group, and we see that Nakayama and Monaghetti very much at the forefront with Mekonnen. What do you make of the little Ethiopian on Steve's left? He's got some great times. He didn't finish in Rome. I think that's his only championship that I've looked through. He's won 7 races. He's had some fast runs, but of course, he couldn't run in 1988 because Ethiopia was one of the half a dozen countries that boycotted Seoul.
That's right. He's a very high-quality athlete, and one of the obvious dangers. I think the DNF in Rome is one of those things that you sort of say, well, maybe he can't handle the heat as well as he might, but he's in our top group of a half dozen.
So they're the splits, 15:38 and 31:08, which would give them something around about 2:11 and a half, 2:11. So it's a good, solid, even pace. We saw that in the women's marathon as well. And if you think that the Japanese director's focusing on this man quite a bit because he's not in the front group, well, he knows his marathons because this is his style. He's able to give outstanding athletes a bit of a start and reel them in. He's very much single-minded in these situations. The Italians have a tremendous game plan too. I mean, they're well supported, their marathoners, to concentrate on the major events.
Yeah, Bordin's been at Siestieri training. I think he might even live at altitude, and he's a fantastic athlete. There's no question about that. I think the one doubt about Bordin is that he has run a number of marathons. London, he didn't finish though, so I guess you don't count it. But he lined up, and you know, that's the one chink in the armour that we think might be there, but it's not a huge chink, unfortunately.
I was really surprised last year that he ran so quickly after the European Championships. He won that race in Split, and then he went out and ran another marathon in Italy, again in slow time.
Yep.
And as I said earlier, he's had 5 marathons since November '89 and 4 since April 1990.
Yep.
Now, Steve, since April 1990, he's run 1. There's a big difference, isn't there?
Yeah, well, you know, we've got to really see the result in the end, but I think you can run too many marathons. I think you only know you've run too many when you've run a bad one, and so our view is run as few as possible. The problem is it means that you generally have to run major championships and you don't get to run fast. But Mona had his fast one at Berlin, and he's run the fastest time over the last 20 months, I think, now. So he's fast and he's got a championship record. He's going to be a big threat, there's no doubt.
Well, Monaghetti and Nakayama leading the first group and Bordin leading the second. Yes, I remember in 1986 you were quite surprised that De Castella ran in New York after winning in Boston and also winning in Edinburgh at the Commonwealth Games, and he may have paid the penalty for that the next year when he also didn't finish in Rome at the World Championships.
Yeah, you can definitely run too many, and I think Deke now would say that he's probably had one too many. Rotterdam, his win in Rotterdam wasn't a surprise because it was really his first one for 15 months, so it allowed his body to recover.
There's a Tokyo Tower. They've run past the Imperial Palace, Tokyo Dome and Tokyo Tower, very much through the heart of this city, and I couldn't believe how many people were out and about this morning at 5 o'clock. I'm not sure if they were just coming home or just getting up, but there were so many of them. It was It's like George Street in Sydney, or Swanston Street, or King William Street in Adelaide, or Swanston Street in Melbourne, you know, 5 o'clock on a Friday night. It was amazing. But
on the bus coming in, we thought the bus would be about a half-hour trip, and they still managed to find plenty of traffic at 4:30 this morning. It's an amazing little city.
Not too little, Chris.
No.
With about 12.5 million people. But, well, one of the real centres of the world, isn't it? And they have a number of major marathons and sporting events here. So, well, Steve Monaghetti, his game plan was to run evenly and strongly until the hard part of this race, which will come after 30 kilometres, and it's all worked out pretty well for him. I did notice earlier that Danny Boltz, number 939, we might get a view of Danny. He was in that lead group. He's running for Switzerland today. He has lived, I think, nearly all of his life in Australia, in Sydney, and ran second in the Los Angeles Marathon this year in 2:11, won Twin Cities in 1988, and was second behind Peter Renner in the Australian Marathon a few years ago. And Boltz, he's up there near the lead group, but we might try and pick him up. But that's Nakayama. And a 4:79 is Freigan from Germany, Canadian Peter Meyer, and 2:20 Cuba, Mekinen, the very tiny Ethiopian. So that lead group, including Monaghetti and Alfredo Shahanga, and we're getting up towards 40 minutes in this World Championship Marathon, and you're watching it from Tokyo live on 7 right around Australia. Almost at 43 minutes, Steve Monaghetti, number 51, and Galindo Bordin in the second group, as we welcome you back to Tokyo and this World Championship. Many Australians in the stands today. In fact, sitting around us, Steve's wife, Tanya, and Pat Clohessy, the coach of Rob de Castella, who I know that Chris Wardlaw, who we were talking to a moment ago, talks to Pat a lot about preparation. And in many ways, Peter Matthews, as we welcome you back, Steve's program has been very much like Rob de Castella's over the years, in training and preparation for the major events.
Well, there's been a lot of thought given to it, I know, and a lot of preparation, and I think it's a fine art. Well, Galindo Bordin very much running here, his own race. There appeared to be a group ahead of him, about 13 or 14. At one stage, they seem to be getting away a little bit, but Bordin knows exactly what he's doing, and he's right on the back of that group. So they haven't got away. Takayuki Nakayama of Japan running strongly, aggressively at the front, and we were speculating that maybe sometimes a little too aggressive.
Has run 27:35 on the track as the Asian record holder. Former Asian record holder in the marathon, but that's a quality running to have been able to run 10,000 metres in 27:35, and he's an outstanding athlete. Only his third major championship, as we mentioned earlier. He's won Fukuoka twice in 84 and 87. Rob de Castella was his first big win in 1981 in Fukuoka. He's won the Tokyo Marathon once and the Seoul Marathon in 1985. And then went back to Seoul in 1986 and won the Asian Games, and then went back to Seoul in 1988 and ran fourth in the Olympics. So we're talking about 6:75. Nakayama, the big hope from Japan.
Well, mostly they're the favourites amongst those leading group, but one or two slightly surprising names, including the man wearing 656, that Ahmed Al-Hamshani. Well, he comes from Jordan and really is coming here with almost no reputation, but clearly a man who'll be used to running in hot conditions.
Taniguchi, you can see in the middle of that lead group with his head just to the side. And as we go back, there is Taniguchi. And it looks like Bordin has moved right up into this lead group with just behind him Peter Meyer of Canada. So Bordin, very comfortable, very smooth. He's bigger than a lot of the marathons. He's probably a similar size to Rob de Castella.
Yes, he looks a powerful, tall, big man. I mean, he's not really particularly. All the marathoners, of course, are pretty slender, really, but it's all relative, isn't it? The Japanese certainly quite small and compact, though Nakayama is the tallest of them.
Getting towards 15 kilometres, and something around 47 minutes will give you at the 2:12 pace.
That's Jan Horuk of Poland. He was third in the World Cup Marathon in London in 2 hours 10:21, just a little bit back then from this leading group.
He ran 4 marathons in 1990, which I think might go against him. His championship record, only the once, was at the Europeans in 1990 in Split, where he failed to finish. But he did run third in London that year and ran his fastest time in Vienna when he was second in 2:10:16. 7:67 is Castillo of Mexico. He was third in Tokyo and fourth in Rotterdam this year, Peter. And believe it or not, he ran the same time of 2 hours, 10 minutes, 47 both times.
Well, if he does 2:10:47 today, he's likely to win it, but I don't think he will. I think it'll be conditions very different here from what they were in the big spring races in Europe, of course, where you get much cooler conditions.
Got the big bandage on the right knee, which I don't think's the best sign in a marathon going out with that. Yes, I think 50 of the 60 marathoners, if they were given 2:10:47 before they started today, would quite happily take that and stay in the hotel room and wait for the result, because they'd be very close to getting a medal, if not the gold. So let's have a look at this split at 15K. And we're saying that around about 47 minutes is going to give you about 2:12. So it's been an even pace, which will suit, I think, all the favourites. So here we go, about 46:54, 46:55. So about 2:12, and maybe a touch quicker than that. But that's what you would expect in these conditions, under the pressure that these athletes are running under. Remember, in most of the major marathons now, there's a situation set up. I say major marathons, away from the championships, where at least one athlete is sent out there to run the first half of the race in a certain time. It might be 62.5 minutes, 63 minutes.
One of the things at these stations, of course, is make sure you get the right drinks bottle. I always think it's quite remarkable how they manage to do so, because you've got a big group and you're running past at speed. You can't exactly stop and sort them out. Very important to take the right one. I've seen before now someone take the wrong one and get very upset at some sort of solution that they weren't expecting.
Well, Steve's certainly been getting his drinks all right, and Borden getting a couple of drinks there. Now, the split for the 5K between 10 and 15 was about 15 seconds slower than the split between 5 and 10. So it's probably one of the reasons that Galindo Borden has moved up from behind the lead group to very much a part of them.
Well, he's certainly not a man who's going to panic about any slight changes in pace. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly the pace he wants to go at. And at this stage of the race, he'll be quite content just to watch people ahead of him. You won't see him doing anything aggressive and taking the pace on until very much strongly into the second part. Indeed, after about 3/4 of the way through the race, I would suggest. I notice the Ethiopians are still pretty prominent, both Abibi Mekkonen, number 316, and his new teammate, 315, Jeke Geselasi. But already we're starting men finding it too much.
It's Danny Bolts, who we were talking about earlier, now running for Switzerland, and many Australians would know Danny very, very well. Lived in Sydney for most of his career, and trained there, and ran in a couple of Australian marathons, and ran second in Los Angeles earlier this year in 2:11. So he's a quality athlete, and you see that he's already gone after 47, 48 minutes. Such is the pressure and the heat of this race. And Nakayama leading. I noticed Ahmed Salah very much in this group too, Peter. He's just behind on the right of Steve Monteghetti on screen. Salah, whose last victory was in the World Cup in 1987 in Seoul. And he really made his mark in 1985 in Hiroshima when he won the World Cup and had a tremendous duel with number 675 Nakayama. At the time, it was one of the great races.
Yes, you just wondered whether Salah, who's now 35, you know, maybe his best days are behind him. But a man with his big championship record, third in the Olympics, a couple of World Cup wins, an African championship win, you don't underestimate people like that, because this is what it's about in this sort of race. It's big championship success, and he's certainly got it.
And you can see that it was a 15:47, so Bolts is up and running again.
Well, amongst the runners there, no, but that's Bolts, of course, and running alongside him. Good to see him back again. And in company with him is Brad Hudson of the USA, who's done 2:13:24 for a best.
Well, Americans of the United States have won a number of gold medals here and have set the scene in the stadium with Carl Lewis and Mike Powell, but this is one race that we don't expect them to figure prominently in.
No, it's very interesting how the Americans have gone really backwards in terms of world-class strength at the marathon. They led the way, really, in the running boom with Frank Shorter and Bill Rogers and so on, and they've really been struggling to find any worthy successors to that. Maybe one of the main reasons is there's so many road races, the 10Ks and the 10 miles, at which people can earn a good living in the States, that they aren't concentrating single-mindedly enough on marathons.
In the early 80s, we thought they had one in Alberto Salazar. He ran in that race with Rob de Castella in Rotterdam in 1983. He ran fifth, Deek first, and Lopez second. And Salazar then went on to run in the Los Angeles Marathon, but his career has been quite sad since then. And Moneghetti, number 51, a couple of strides behind Nakayama, number 675, and Cuba, number 220.
Yeah, well, Cuba's still going to run very well, wasn't it? We thought perhaps when he led and opened up some 40 meters at the start that he might be a little bit of a flash in the pan, but he's running pretty strongly for a man who's already run and won a marathon but 3 weeks ago.
So that's the scene in Tokyo, with Moneghetti running very comfortably left of screen, and the man to beat with a hat on about 6 or 7 metres behind him, Galindo Bordino. Well, it's coming up towards 7 o'clock in Tokyo, almost 8 o'clock Eastern Australian time on this Sunday morning, and Steve Moneghetti at 18.25 kilometres, very much in the lead group. 881 is a Pinheiro of Portugal, and 475 Dobler of Germany. They're off the lead group. Dobler's run 2:11.57. He was 11th in London, the man on the left, at the World Cup earlier this year, and Pinheiro was 5th in London in 2:10.38. That raced the World Cup, doubling up as the London Marathon and World Cup. And you can see they're behind the lead group by, oh, I guess 80 to 100 metres. And Steve Moneghetti and Nakayama of Japan very much to the forefront, with Freigan with the glasses on behind Steve, the German, who there is a big question mark on here. And Peter Matthews, the editor of the Guinness Book of Records, and also Athletics 91, who's working with us today and works for ITV in London. And Peter Bordin is very much part of this lead group now.
Certainly is. I mean, he was prepared to be slightly tailed off if necessary, but he's joined there. He's prominent really for the first time in the race. And these, the group of about 20 are now getting away from the rest of the field, but it's still a big pack out there. Konrad Dobler was prominent in that lead group for quite a long time, and suddenly he's had to go back. That's the way it works out. Dobler running alongside Pinheiro. Of course, once you get off the back of the lead group, it's very easy to go further and further back through the field.
It's Ramiro of Spain, or Ramira. Juan Francisco, his best time is 2:10.48. Mentioned right at the start here that 11 men in this field have run under 2:10. They're 70 metres behind the leaders, this second group. And Tolstakov, one of the favourites, is another 100 metres behind this group.
Yes, I think he had his day of days, really, in London. You think it would have been a surprise, really, if he'd done too well in this race, because his big championship record is not that good. He had a wonderful day in London, and that was, well, that was his little bit of history. But here's the leading group. We've got Moneghetti prominent, so too is Nakayama, Bordin in the cap just behind him, Stephen Freigang in there. We've got Castillo of Mexico in there, Kim of Korea, Ahmed Salah also looking good. Peter Meyer of Canada is still there, the tall figure. Alberto Cuba of Cuba is still there. So really most of the favourites, particularly Moneghetti obviously, and Bordin and Nakayama and Salah, they're all still there. So too the Ethiopian Mekkonen.
Took a head count there, Peter, and don't quote me and keep me to it, but I think there's 19. There's 18 or 19 there. So they've got down to that stage as they work their way up towards 20 kilometres. They're at 19 kilometres now. There's 479. We've talked about him, Stefan Freigang from Germany, who made his debut in Berlin in 1990. 318 is Dadi of Ethiopia. He was third in Rotterdam this year, and 51. Well, you don't need to tell you exactly who that is. Steve Moneghetti. His victory in Berlin was a breakthrough. It was his first marathon victory, and his first victory overseas since the World Student Cross Country Championship in 1986. He was fourth in the World Cross Country Championship in 1989, highest ever placing by an Australian. And wouldn't he like to bring home a gold medal here? No Australian medal so far at these championships. We've had a number of athletes in the top 16, but the standard is so very high. To win a gold medal here is like winning a gold medal at the Olympic Games. It's just as tough in all the events. So they've been going for an hour. I said the Berlin Marathon is his first win. I'd forgotten the one 2 weeks before when he ran the unofficial world record, Peter, for the Great North Run, beating Wakahiri and Ondiki that day. So he made it a double within a fortnight. Quite interesting here that, I mean, interesting in Berlin that Steve ran a half marathon so quickly just 2 weeks before, was able to back up in Berlin. It must give him tremendous confidence. Not only for this race, but for the future. It's unusual to be able to run a half marathon in such standards and then be able to reproduce a marathon so shortly afterwards.
It just shows the difference, I think, though, between running a half marathon and running a marathon, because the marathon takes so much more out of you, even in the half marathon, even a world-class one.
Just been told that Danny Bolts has called it a day and has retired. He did get going again, running for Switzerland today, but most Australians would know him. There's Taniguchi in the middle of that group, running his first championship, the 31-year-old, who's won a number of marathons right around the world, including London in '87 and Rotterdam in 1990.
And there's 3:16. That's Mekkonen of Ethiopia. And talking of cross-country, he's got a great record in the cross-country. He was second in the world cross-country in '86 and 3 more top 10 placings since then. That's him, Bibi Mekkonen. So a top cross-country runner, of course, with a great tradition from Ethiopia and Kenya, who've absolutely dominated the World Cross-Country Championship in recent years. And he's combined cross-country running in the winter with top-class marathon running all round the world.
I did notice at the back of this group too, Salvatore Bettiol of Italy. So another Italian in the group, very much the second man to Bourdin here.
But a good man, though. 4th in the European Championships and 2nd in the London last year, 3rd in the World Cup in '87. A big championship man again.
And again, that preparation that the Italians are able to do. Poli and Pizzolato have been 2 other men that have done well in major marathons in the last, or through the '80s. So it hasn't only been Bourdin carrying the flag for Italy. As we get towards 20 kilometres, now 62.40s at about 2:12 pace. So they've slowed just a little again in this 15 to 20k split. So 62.53, and we'd make that just over 2:12 pace. 15.58. Moneghetti checks his watch and speaks to Freigang about it and says, well, that was only 15.58, Stefan. I'm not sure if he did say that, but it looked like it, Peter, anyway. But so they're getting slightly slower. In fact, they are getting slower each split. Now, here we go. 15.30, 8 the first, and 15.30 the second, then 15.47 and 15.58.
Well, that's one of the reasons, of course, there's still a big group there, and I just wonder if 1 or 2 of the runners will just pick up the pace a little bit here.
Well, you do notice that the gaps are starting to come in this group of 18 or 19. When we look at them from this camera angle, they look very much bunched, but I'm sure if we went back, we'd see that the 2 at the back here would be some 20 or 30 metres off the lead group now. Get an aerial here. We may get a chance to have a look at this.
Certainly Stefan Freigang looked pretty good, and it looked like he might be prepared to pick it up a bit. But the thing with, if he'd been concentrating on the track, and of course he won the World Student Games title, there's Tokyo Bay there set out. If you've been concentrating on the track, as I was saying, you have to wonder about whether you'll last the marathon distance so well, but he looked pretty good.
Noticed one of the Ethiopians off the back. There's Shinohara, the 3rd Japanese runner, and he's not in the lead group, or just giving a little shove to the man in front of him, who is Gilalasi of Ethiopia, who's a 2:12.05 runner. So they've got a similar best time, Taniguchi. So Shinohara was in fact just off this main group, the lead group. That's Ahmed Salah and now Galindo Bourdin. So some of the great names in the sport as we go through them.
Nakayama there. So all these people well in touch with the leaders.
It's Freigang, just his 2nd marathon, the German. Interesting to see how the Europeans are prepared for this. Bourdin has been in Tokyo for a fortnight, and Chris Wardlaw mentioned earlier that he's been living and training at altitude in Sestria, where they have one track meeting a year where they try and break world records in the sprints and the long jump. Didn't have much luck this year because the weather turned very foul on them. In fact, Lewis refused to jump that night.
Yeah, but we saw a pointer, of course, because Mike Powell jumped, and he jumped very well indeed. He did 8.73, and he gave indication of what was to come in one of the greatest competitions I think any of us have ever seen at any event in track and field history. That wonderful clash between Lewis and Powell in the long jump, which is a feature, surely, of this World Championships. And a great World Championships it is too, and a great marathon, I'm sure, in progress as well.
Yes, I think we've seen 2 of the classics, the 100 metres and the long jump. They'll go down as 2 of the greatest events in the history of the sport. And we're getting up towards the turnaround point, towards halfway here. Bourdin taking in plenty of fluid, and he must have a hole in that hat and getting the water through into his hair. And Moneghetti, as the cars will go around earlier, and the lead group will go around about 100 metres further on. I think that was the story in the women's marathon. We saw somebody almost take the wrong turn.
Yes, I hope they're better prepared for it this time. They seem to be. The runners are, in fact, a little bit further back from the lead cars, and they're less likely to be distracted. In fact, they're not being distracted. The marshals are very careful, and we're not going to see anyone try to break off and go around too soon, which almost caused a major problem in the women's race.
16 in the lead group. I think there was 19 before, so we're down to 16 at about halfway. Field of 60 starting. And the big difference between this race and something like New York and London, where they get 25,000, is that, well, 25 of the 60 have got a chance of winning, instead of maybe 7 of the 27,000.
That's right. Of course, at this stage in the halfway race, the elite runners don't see too many of those 25,000 behind them.
6:08, Bettiol of Italy. We've spoken about him, about his very good record. There's Nakayama, Bourdin, Sala in the blue strip from Djibouti, who the Djiboutians, I think from memory, might have even won the team competition in 1985 in Hiroshima. They had Roble, Jama Roble and Sala very much up the front. And here's 3:16 Mekinen, one of the favourites, who's just off the back of this lead group. That's a good sign, isn't it?
One gone, you can say. They're gradually whittling away.
Mekinen, very much one of the favourites here. It looks like your Peter too, who's off the lead group. So two of the favourites are back. And well, I asked you this question last week, Peter. When they do drop off like that, they don't come back, do they?
They don't.
I was just wondering if you
can
change your
way
mind
up through the field sometimes, but once you're off a group and you've been there, you don't come back. At least it's just not known at all.
Spaniard Ramira, who we spoke about earlier, and one of the Americans, 11:63.
Yeah, that's Steve Spence, who won the Columbus Marathon last year. Good road runner, good consistent form at 10Ks and so on, but not quite in the very top league of marathon runners.
And there is a big difference, isn't there? Here's Dave Buzzer, who we talked about earlier, running for Great Britain for the first time today. Has been living in Melbourne, Australia, and training out there. His only other marathon was in London this year, where he ran 16th in 2:12:37.
Yeah, Cornishman running a good race here, I must say, because obviously he wouldn't have expected to be amongst the leaders, and if he can get a place somewhere around 15 to 20th, he'll have done really well.
And for the first time in this marathon, in 68% humidity and 27 degrees, the man with the hat on, the Olympic champion, is at the front of this lead group, Galindo Bourdin. And I'm sure that if Bourdin picks the pace up, then Moneghetti will go with him at this stage. There's no way they're going to let Bourdin move away.
No, that's one man you certainly don't let get away. And indeed, the reverse is true as well. If Moneghetti goes away, you can be sure that Bourdin will try and go with him.
And I think this is Mekinen, who's, it is 3:16, who's off this lead group. And very much on his own now, and it's going to be tough for him to get back. He didn't finish his only major championship in Rome in 1987, but he's won 7 marathons. He's got 3 times inside 2:09, 7 times inside 2:10, and is the second fastest man in the field. He's won marathons in Rotterdam, Montreal, Paris, Tokyo, Beijing, Boston, and Tokyo again this year in 1991 on this course, but in very different weather conditions. So 22 kilometres into the marathon, we're over halfway, and Steve Moneghetti very much a part of the action. Taniguchi on his left, on our right, Bourdin tucked in behind, and Mekinen some 60 or 70 metres behind this lead group. And as we work our way back through them, they are starting to drop, about 15 or 16. And we'll be back in Tokyo very shortly as we leave Kim of Korea off the lead group. And welcome back to Tokyo. We can see Dadi of Ethiopia now being dropped from this lead group. And the numbers in this lead group are whittling down. We believe we're down to 14. The halfway point was reached in 66:25. And you times that by 2, you get 2 hours, 12 minutes and 50 seconds. Chris Wardle has rejoined us, Steve's coach, Olympian from Montreal and Moscow. And, well, Chris, you've been watching it with us, and you must be really satisfied with how the race is going so far, though not quite so satisfied when you look at who's just sitting on Steve at this stage with the hat on.
Yeah, we've got rid of a couple of real dangers, but yeah, Bourdin's still there, and I'm very impressed with the way Freegang's running, 4:79. He ran very well at Berlin, and I think it was his debut marathon, and he hasn't run one since. Ran a quality 10K at the World Students, so I give, you know, he's moving beautifully. There's about 12 there, and they're all big dangers, but Mono's very prominent in the group, which means that he's feeling strong, he's feeling good, he's wanting to sort of try and dominate it a bit, which is the time to do it. I noticed Taguchi and Nakayama are there, who will be really tough.
Shinohara's there as well, so the 3 Japanese are still very much amongst this lead group.
Yes, you know, it's a very, very strong group there. I noticed Peter Ma hanging in there too. He's running very well.
Jan Hurup there too. This is Dadi of Tesfaye Dadi of Ethiopia, who was 3rd in Rotterdam this year in a pretty fast time of 2:10:08, and he looks to be about to join Mekinen. off the pack. He's in 15th position, Tardy, so we can see there are 14 in the lead group. What do we expect from here, Chris? We're getting still a fair way away from this rise at 36 kilometres.
Yeah, the Imperial Palace is really about 12, 13k to go, and that's when we'll start to see things happen. Ideally, I'd love somebody to pick it up a little bit and just get it rolling, maybe break the group up, maybe back to 4 or 5 even would be terrific. Mono would get a great lift from that. And but we've talked about the fact that at 30k there could be as many as 15 or 20 there, so Mono wouldn't be worried at all at this stage. But what I do like is he's moving very well. He's got all his drinks. He's done everything right, as usual. And this is his tremendous strength. He's a terrific athlete. Little move being made here.
Huruk of Poland, whose only other major marathon championship-wise was a non-finish at the Europeans in very hot weather in Split last year. Here's another casualty. In fact, he's going to go onto the toilet. In fact, I hope we leave him right now. Don't need that on a Sunday morning back home, do we?
But I'm amazed he's got anything there.
Here's Sala
too.
Yes.
Sala's going up there. Now this is where you've got to be thinking. Bourdin and Mono and Nakayama and Taganucci, and Freeding, they'd be wondering, okay, is this a move?
Well, you wouldn't worry so much about the pole, Europe, but you'd worry about Sala. He was the man that in Seoul split them apart late in the race, got rid of Wakahiri and Bourdin, but he himself was then passed in the final kilometres of the race. Number 42 on his shorts and number 250 we're talking about. Ahmed Sala, the 35-year-old from Djibouti.
Yep.
And one of the Ethiopians, the third of the Ethiopians, it must be Gilles Lassie, who's made a move, because Mekinen and Dardi are both off the back. So Steve and Bourdin still running together, about 20 metres behind this lead group of 3.
Yeah, I wouldn't want a big gap to open, not to the Ethiopian and the Pole and Sala. I honestly think that they're monitoring it though, and there's this thing called contact and a bit of elastic, and they know that the elastic's quite strong and it's not a big problem at this stage. But when it gets out a little bit, certainly the coach starts to panic, I can assure you.
Well, Chris, the good thing about here, there's very much the heart and soul of the races in this group when you've got Bourdin and Nakayama and also Moneghetti. If you had 3 favourites, they were the 3 going in.
Yeah, no doubt. They're the 3, and with Mekinen, who's now off, and so Taganucci as well. The Japanese that I've spoken to up here believe that Taganucci is a bigger threat than Nakayama. I'm not as convinced, but the message was pretty clear from a number of Japanese. So we've got to think that he's a bit of a chance.
Well, the screen said McConan there, number 316, but we did see him before the last commercial break, much too far off the pack to be him. So we're pretty sure it's not McConan. Here's the other group, with Steve Moneghetti, Freigen, Nakayama and Bourdin, all very much amongst that. What's your theory on the Japanese runners here? There's been tremendous pressure on them to win an Olympic gold medal. In fact, in 83 and 87, they really bypassed the World Championships in preparation for Los Angeles and also for Seoul. Yep. Yes, we've been corrected, sir. Yes, it's Gilalasi of Ethiopia 315. Your thoughts on the pressure that might be on the Japanese today? And we have 3 of them in the lead group. Amazing
pressure, and the crowd will be waving their little Japanese flags. I've been up here running in Japan and they go crazy. A lot of pressure on the Japanese. Their Olympic aspirant Murashita, who was the fastest time this year, in fact was pre-selected for Barcelona next year, in February this year. That's how much pressure they put on their athletes. He's not even in this race.
So 17 months out, they've pre-selected someone for Barcelona, so they really give them time to prepare.
And put some pressure on them.
Sure do. Now we're up towards 25k, about to hit it in a minute, and here we go at 1:18:57, and we'll get a 5k split in a minute. 16:07 for that 5k, so they're slowing.
Yeah, it's getting slower, and every 5k is slowing down except the second one. Obviously, the conditions are real tough. There's no question about that. It could end up being a 2:13, 2:14 race, although the kick down might be savage, but I would think a couple of seconds a k for 2 or 3k might break up the bunch pretty significantly.
Just okay, still off this lead group. Now, here are the cumulative splits, and we see a 25k. It's 1:18:57. So from halfway to 25k, It's a 12:32, halfway 42.195 divided by 2 kilometres. Now, this group of 3 has, I think, been reeled in here. I think when we go back, we'll see that they're very much, well, there's Nakayama, who's certainly tacked on. He's bored in, and Moneghetti very much still in this lead group of athletes.
They all made sure they got their drinks.
When doesn't it matter? Is there a point in the race where you could give it away and not worry about it?
Mona's got a little gap there. He's got to get back on. I think, and bored in. I think probably I'd stop worrying about them at 35k and 40 if they're not, you know, if you can't get them, don't bother. It's too late.
You don't think they do you much good after that?
No, the first 5 are critical, and he's got them all, so that's very happy. And he's moved up nicely there again. He's rolling along.
Yes, well, his reaction was quick there, Steve Moneghetti's, and Bourdin still off the back, but that's very much his style. Hurek leading, number 858, and the 30-year-old. He'd be a surprise winner here. Very rarely in major marathons where gold medals at stake do you see somebody who's had 4 or 5 starts in commercial marathons and hasn't really broken through sensationally come out and win here. It's the men that haven't raced as much that you'd worry about. And there's Hurek, the 31-year-old, 2:10.16 his best. He ran that in Vienna in 1990. Had 4 marathons in that year, and I reckon, Chris, that's probably 1 or 2 too many. Panfil from Pole winning, the Polish runner winning last week, and well, who knows? We had an Algerian win the 1500 in the women's yesterday and an Algerian favourite today, but this one would be a surprise.
It would be, but at this stage, they're all incredible dangers.
I get the feeling, Chris, you're feeling a bit nervous at this stage.
The pressure's amazing, Bruce. Well, you put in a lot of work. Mona's been working for this for a long time, and since Seoul, really, or even before Seoul, I guess. But since Seoul, he knew 91 was going to be his peak year, and there's really no tomorrow. We're not even thinking of Barcelona. This is it for him today, and hopefully he's going to run a big one.
Well, interesting time here for Galindo Bourdin. No panic stations at all. I don't think I've ever seen him panic. No, came through in Seoul when the pressure was really on him, but was dropped off, and also came through in Rome for a minor placing. But he's a little way off this group, and I just put a little question mark next to him right now, like we did with Rosa Mota last week. And well, if Steve's got 30, 40, 50 metres on him when they get to that hill stage and he's feeling pretty well, then that could be substantial. There's Bourdin way over to the left. Moneghetti very much a part of, it looks like 7 runners, maybe 8. Yes, there's one tucked in behind Nakayama, one of the other Japanese, Shinohara. And Bourdin.
I think he's rolling along pretty comfortably, Bourdin.
Well, so Steve Moneghetti, and he's sitting right on Hurek. One of the Ethiopians there, the favourite Ethiopian's gone in Mekinen, but Sala's still very much in that lead group. Spoke to Peter about Sala a moment ago, and you can see Bourdin there, he's still 20 metres behind them. What's your theory on Sala? He's the fastest man in the race, second fastest of all time. Do you think he may have had his day?
Well, you'd like to think so, but he hasn't run a race this year. He started in Rotterdam and fell over it right at the start, so didn't run a marathon. So, you know, he may be relatively fresh. Bourdin's just reeling in the group there now. I think Sala's, you know, an obvious danger. Anyone who's run 2.7, gee, you know, they're great runners. But you'd like to think that Mona might be just a little bit younger, a little bit fresher, a little bit stronger than Sala. But Lopez won the Olympics at 37, so, you know.
That's right. Well, we've got a group of 7 and then Bourdin. Moneghetti in that group. We've got 3 from Japan, 2 Africans, the Pole Hurek, and one of the favourites, Galindo Bourdin, the Olympic champion, just sitting on them about 10 or 20 metres behind as we take a break and return to Tokyo shortly. Welcome back to Tokyo. Galindo Bourdin very much part of the group now in front. Nakayama just slightly off the back, number 475, about 5 metres behind this lead group. But still 3 Japanese there, 2 Italians, Bettiol there. We saw Matthias go a moment ago, one of the top runners, and number 12 there is Selmi of Algeria, who's a 2.13, 2.14 runner, so he wasn't amongst the favourites. But Matthias of Portugal, who's a 2.9.43 runner, retiring a moment ago when we were in a break. Well, we've been talking to Chris Wardlaw today, the coach of Steve Moneghetti. Pat Clohessy now joins us, coach of Rob De Castella, and had a lot to do with Chris's own career. And Pat's man, Rob, winning the very first World Championship Marathon in Helsinki in 1983 as we look at Nakayama. It was a very different day, Pat, in Helsinki compared with this one. The heat and humidity is very powerful here.
Yes, it's certainly going to be a really big factor in this race. The sun's come out and it's quite strong.
There's Pinheiro going, by the way, another Portuguese. So the Portuguese, Chloe, in the last 5 minutes haven't had much luck. They've lost both Matthias and Pinheiro. They've both gone out of the race.
Yes, it's a very difficult race. We felt all along that the Japanese are very well prepared here, and they'll be really tenacious, as they were in the women's race. And Bourdin, of course, is a really big factor. I think Steve's running exceptionally well. I think he's excellently prepared. His city to surf and other runs have indicated this, and I'm very happy the way Steve's running at the moment.
Well, both Steve and Chris have been able to get a measure of his form on that city to surf. He broke the De Castella record there, and I'm pretty sure from memory De Castella, after that city to surf, went on and ran his very fast one in Fukuoka. And Steve also went and did a 10-mile time trial in Melbourne, where he tested himself against Rob De Castella's best time, and Rob had run a fast time in 1983 before he won the World Championship. So the Wardlaw, the coach, and Moneghetti, the athlete, have very much based themselves on De Castella and his performances in the past.
Yes, I think Steve's running exceptionally well, and those trends are there. His city to surf over the last couple of years have been very, very impressive. And of course, we go back to his great run in the Great North Run and also Berlin Marathon, and he's in really good form. So I'm really hopeful and optimistic for Steve. He really deserves to run a big one here. His competitive record is excellent in these big ones. We know Bourdin's a big factor, and the others there, but certainly wish Steve all the very best, and we're very hopeful.
You've been able to observe from some distance Moneghetti's progress. Now, in Seoul, he was 5th, Bourdin the winner there. You see another retiree there, number 479. That's well, that's Freigan gone. So Freigan's now off the group. One of the top chances here, the German, and 316. That's Mekinen, well and truly gone. Now, we're looking at the best athletes in the world here, the best marathoners, and they're going left, right, and centre. The theme I was developing, Pat, was that we're talking to Pat Clohessy, Rob De Castella's coach, is that Steve in Seoul was 5th. In Rome, he was 4th. That's 4 and 3 years ago. And this man was in front of him both times, Sala. Do you feel that he's really peaking at this stage of his career at 28 years of age?
Steve's improved more than the other runners. He was right in contention in the big ones to date, and he has definitely improved over the last couple of years. His current form is excellent, and I think Bourdin and Salar will find Steve Moneghetti very, very difficult to beat today.
Well, Taniguchi still looking reasonably confident.
Yes, the Japanese are a definite factor here. Nakayama and Taniguchi are great runners, and you can expect that they would be impeccably prepared for the Tokyo race here today.
What's quite interesting, though, Pat, that is Nakayama's at the back of this group. Now, we mentioned earlier that he's normally an aggressive runner. We're talking about number 675 here at the back of this lead group, which is being led by Steve Moneghetti of Australia. Nakayama, normally aggressive, likes to run from the front, and the fact that he's sitting back now, as we look at Mekinen, the second fastest man in this field, the man who's won 7 marathons, not a gold medal. He was 2nd in a World Cross Country Championship. He's been one of the very great distance runners. It was such a shame that he was unable to run in the Olympic Games because of a boycott in 1988, but he's now losing his position. In fact, KH Sang of Botswana's gone past him, and his best time's 2:20, so Mekonnen very much out of the picture. But Nakayama, not off the group, but at the back of the group. Can we take anything from that at the moment?
Oh, perhaps not. He might be just going back there for a bit of a break. He was up with the leaders right through, so, you know, they often drop back to get the feel.
We've often seen
we can't discount him.
Pat, we've often seen Rob De Castella in this position when he was winning major marathons, at the front, very much in the centrepiece of the pack, like Bourdin is. And it appears at this stage that the runners are developing themselves around Bourdin and Moneghetti.
Yes, I think so. I think the astute observers realise that Steve Moneghetti has been in really good form after his Berlin Marathon and his great runs last year, and his current form, and of course Bourdin too. So, but I think Steve's in really excellent form, and Bourdin, you know, any of that group is a danger.
Well, we're going to find out shortly, Pat, because we're getting towards the stage of the race where Steve Moneghetti thought it was going to be very, very critical to Bourdin. Pat, thanks for joining us, and we know that both Steve and Rob De Castella will be running in Barcelona at the Olympic Games, but that's another race and some time off, and you, like a number of other Australians that are sitting here in the stadium, are hoping that in about 40 minutes' time that number 51 is the first man through the tunnel.
Yes, thank you, Bruce.
Pat Clohessy, who's just joined us, and I'll be rejoined by Peter Matthews in just one moment as Steve Monaghetti leads from Taniguchi of Japan. And Peter, it's great that Steve's got such support around him here. He knows there are a lot of Australians that are in Tokyo. Many of them have just come over to watch him run in this race.
Well, I feel I mean, I'm a neutral almost sitting here, surrounded by Australians. I'm going to have to be in composure at the end while the rest of you fall about, I think. But I'm delighted to see that Steve is really such a positive race here. Let's just remind ourselves, there's a group of 10 now. Let's just go through them. We've got Jan Haruk of Poland. We've got Steve Monaghetti of Australia. We've got Giselazi of Ethiopia. We've got the Japanese, Nakayama, Taniguchi, and Shinohara. We've got Sala of Djibouti, Bettiol and Bordin of Italy, and Castillo of Mexico. That's the leading group of 10 who are just beginning to get away a little bit from the rest of the field. And
it's 30 degrees in Tokyo, we've just been told. 26 when we started, and already up to 30. They've been going for an hour and 33 minutes, and it looks to be Freigan, who was amongst the favourites here. And the 32 on the side of his shorts. Let's see if it is, in fact. No, it might be Ericsson, but it's hard to tell. Was it Freigan? No?
No, it was Freigan, I think, has stopped. I think Freigan looked to be all in.
So he's out of it, and 47. It's pretty hard.
That's the other German. That's Konrad Dobler, who was 11th in London. He was up the leading group at the early stages of the race, now running a rather solitary group. Very difficult when you get off a pack and you have to run on your own.
What about Nakayama? We're looking at him now. I spoke to Pat Clohessy a moment ago. There it is, 30 degrees and 60% humidity. Well, dangerous times here for Nakayama.
Yeah, I'm just interested in those weather conditions. I mean, the temperature's going up, but slightly fortunate, the humidity is going down. It was 71% at the start. We then saw a 66% and now a 60%, and that at least is some relief. But, of course, a temperature of 30 degrees Celsius isn't much of a relief.
It's Freigan, who is well and truly spent, as Peter suggested, the man who was 4th in Berlin behind Steve Monaghetti last year and won the World Student Games 10,000 metres in Sheffield this year. And often that's a very good pointer to the marathon.
It's a good start, and I thought he might have the credentials, but it's also a test, really, because obviously people who've done well at 10K and 25K may not be able to do so well at a marathon distance.
Well, Castillo and, even more importantly, Nakayama are just starting to be slowly dropped from this lead group. They're still part of the action, but as we get towards 30K, they're just starting to lose it. Taniguchi's there, Shinohara is still there. Peter's gone through that lead group. And, Peter, we can see that Nakayama is in the situation now where he's going to have to maintain some rhythm and try and tack on.
He's got to catch back fairly quickly. When this happens at this stage in the race, you can so quickly go very, very fast back. I mean, if he doesn't pick it up soon, we could find him 50 metres down within the next mile. We'll see. It doesn't look too good to me, I don't think. If I was supporting Nakayama, I'd be very worried at this moment. If I'm supporting Monaghetti, though, I'm very happy about it. And Chris is nodding his head very vociferously at that point.
Yes, Chris Wardlaw sitting with us here. Steve Monaghetti, Taniguchi, Huruk of Poland, Sala of Djibouti, Bordin, the great Bordin of Italy, very much there. And Nakayama, as we get towards 30K, certainly looks out of the picture. He's 50, 60 metres behind, and he's losing metres very quickly now. And the hardest part of the race is still to come, and you wouldn't fancy his chances at all. 1:35.33. Now, that was 16:30 for that 5K. It's getting slower and slower. It's a battle of attrition. There's no question about that. It's not going to be the fastest man. It's going to be the man who... and is this a move here from 6.87? It looks like it might be from Taniguchi, who's just started to rev it up slightly, Peter.
Well, if he is, it'll be very interesting to see the response from all the runners. And, of course, there's a drink station, so one of the reasons he may have speeded up is in order to get a clear view of the drink station. That's quite important, and one shouldn't read too much into that. But notice Bordin at drink stations is very careful to get the right things. Sometimes he loses some 15 metres or so while he makes sure he takes his drink, he makes sure he gets his sponge, and then he gets back on the group again. So don't read too much into the action just around about a feeding station. It's when they settle down into it afterwards that it matters.
Well, Taniguchi didn't miss taking some water, did he? He had the left hand out there and kept grabbing and grabbing and grabbing. And we should get a guide in the next minute or two whether or not it was just for the feed station or whether or not he wanted to make a serious break. And, well, he has opened up 15 or 20 metres on this group. Bordin and Monaghetti in 6th and 7th position. Here's Taniguchi. First major championship, quite remarkably, 31 years of age. Winner in Beppu, Tokyo twice in 1987 and 1989. Also London in 87.
And still running very well in second place, Jan Huruk of Poland, the man who was second in the Vienna Marathon and third in the World Cup Marathon. Well, we had speculated he's run a lot of commercial marathons. That's true, but so had his teammate Wanda Panfil, who won the women's race. And, well, there may be a pointer.
It's Moneghetti running alongside Bourdin with Sala and Galassi in front of them, the Ethiopian, and Djibouti. Nakayama off the back, and 767 Castillo of Mexico, who's run those 2 marathons in 2:10:47. So there's a bit of a gap here. Taniguchi leading. Shinohara has responded, the other Japanese runner. And we're in the stadium now, and we can see it on the big screen, and the crowd that have come in here are already starting to cheer, but we've got some running to do yet.
Yeah, this could be fairly decisive. I think those men at the back have got to close this gap fairly quickly. It's opened up pretty quickly, and when that happens, you've got to be very careful. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next couple of minutes or so. The two Japanese and Huruk, and both Moneghetti and Bourdin have got a little bit of work to do to close the gap on these two. Also, Bettiol of Italy was up there with Bourdin. There's well, just a little bit of a gap there. They've got to watch this.
Steve Moneghetti in 7th position at the moment, running with Galindo Bourdin, and we haven't got to the big hill at 36k, the one that just winds up slowly to 39k. But the story from Tokyo is that 2 Japanese runners are 1 and 2. There's the lead group: Taniguchi, Shinohara, and Huruk, as we take a break. Welcome back to Tokyo World Championships. This lead group is now 5. You can see that Bourdin and Bettiol, the 2 Italians, are chasing, and the story for Australia is not so good. Steve Moneghetti is in 8th position and 40 metres behind Galindo Bourdin. So Steve's chances now are thinning rapidly. In fact, you can see the gap between Bourdin, Bettiol and Steve Moneghetti, and it's been a decisive move by Taniguchi. Interestingly, that Sala's been able to get back, but Steve's now dropped back with Castillo of Mexico, and well, we've talked about people dropping off in the past and not being able to get back, and unfortunately we're looking at number 51 right now.
Yes, unfortunately we are. There was a decisive break. Taniguchi, Shinohara of Japan and Huruk of Poland went. There was a gap, but Gisselasi of Ethiopia and Ahmed Salah have managed to close the gap, so they're the leading group of 5. Bourdin and Bettiol have set off, and they may yet catch them. In fact, Bourdin and Bettiol are gaining on them, the 2 Italians, but sadly Steve Moneghetti is behind them with Castillo, and he does not seem to be closing the gap.
No, if anything, Peter, it is widening. And Taniguchi, the man on the left of screen, 687, had a look back and would have seen Bourdin right there. And he's the man that first made the break. Sala now taking up the running. 3rd in the Olympic Games. We've got a couple of here that really don't have the pedigree, and Gisselasi and Shinohara. But Shinohara particularly, I know you're impressed with. Here's Bourdin. And you wouldn't count this man out from here.
No, you wouldn't, because the break was quite decisive by Taniguchi, but it has not been maintained. He's definitely slowed. He's enabled other people to catch him, and Bettiol and Bourdin, who didn't panic, they just began to reel them in slowly, have done so. Well, one hoped that Moneghetti would be able to do exactly the same, but that doesn't look too good at the moment. He's some way down. But the break was decisive, but has not been maintained, and I think we're going to get a group of 7 again, and it'll be interesting to see who's the next one who makes a break.
Huruk 858 of Poland, the surprise packet in this lead group, along with Shinohara, number 682. And you can see Bourdin now taken the hat off for the moment, and Bettiol, his Italian teammate, behind him, and there's no Steve Moneghetti in sight at this stage, so that's not what we wanted to see. In fact, Castillo running in front of Steve at the moment. So Australia's chances resting with Steve Moneghetti, and we've got to be quite frank, they're minimal. They're very thin at this stage. Steve's going to find it almost impossible to get back.
Well, it is almost impossible. There's only 30 minutes to go to the finish. I mean, unless he just had a bad patch and could go through it quickly. But really, we're clutching at straws in saying that sort of thing. It does look as if the winner, and indeed all the medalists, are going to come from this group of 7. And 2 Japanese, of course, Shinohara and Taniguchi, the Pole, Jan Huruk, the Ethiopian, Gisselasi, Salah of Djibouti, and the Italians, Bourdin and Bettiol.
So almost 1 3/4 hours into this marathon. We're at about 32.5, 33 kilometres. And we've talked about before the rise in the road between 36 and 39 kilometres. And it looks very much like Bourdin's now the front runner with no hat on. What a remarkable athlete this man is. He's got to be one of the great tacticians of all time. Nothing seems to faze him, Peter. He enables people to go away from him at some stage and then reels them back in. And when it's his day, he very rarely gets beaten.
That's absolutely true. And right now, I'd have to have him as the favourite. You just could look back on his big meat credentials. But having said that, there are 7 men in. And, of course, it could come down to who's got the speed in the finish. But Bourdin looks pretty good. He's looked good all throughout all the race, hasn't he? He's taken his hat off. Does that mean he's meaning more business, I wonder?
Well, he looks like he's feeling not too bad at this stage, if that's possible, after an hour and 3/4 as they go past 33 kilometres. So there's just over 9 to go. And here's Steve Monaghetti. And Steve's in 9th position. Castillo of Mexico in front of him. Number 767. We've spoken about his performances this year. He was 3rd in Tokyo behind Mekkonen at the beginning of the year, and then went to Rotterdam a couple of months after that and ran 4th. And the fact that Steve's not on his back now, that's Nakayama. So one of the Japanese runners gone here. He was in trouble some time ago. And, well, I think he was the favourite of the 3. He certainly had the credentials and the pedigree slightly more than Taniguchi. So he's gone. He'll be absolutely distraught over this. This is his big race of his life, really, and very much out of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the big race credentials, and Taniguchi surprisingly little. In fact, he was 2nd in the Asian Games way back in '86, and since then he's really concentrated on the big city races. But he's won Tokyo in '87 and '89, and perhaps '91 is going to be a good year for him as well. And also winner of the London Marathon back in 1987. Winner of 6 of his 13 marathons. That's Hiromi Taniguchi. He wears number 687.
Big crowds in Tokyo today. We've already told you that the humidity has dropped a little from the start of the race, and the temperature's risen from 26 degrees to 30 about 20 minutes ago. Very hot, warm conditions. We're looking at about 2:13, 2:14 pace. And there's Galindo Bourdin and Hiromi Taniguchi of Japan, 2 of the favourites. Chisalasi of Ethiopia, Huruk of Poland. He's run a tremendous race. He really has been a surprise packet here. Expected him to be one of the first to go. And Sala, well, we talked about Sala maybe being over the hill. Well, he's right there where it counts. And his big race record also is impeccable. Twice World Cup winner. I'm talking about the man on the right of the screen. There's Bourdin in view now. Mentioned earlier, he's the only man in the history of the European Championships to have won the marathon twice. Very focused, and like Monaghetti, has been able to prepare fastidiously for the big event and the big marathons, and usually comes home with a great result. It's the only the only gold medal he really hasn't got. He's got the Olympic and European, and this is the other one he'll be looking for, the world title.
Yeah, looking for it very hard, very single-mindedly, and I have to say he looks very good at this stage. Very good indeed.
So there's the group: Bourdin, Shinohara, Taniguchi, Sala, Chisalasi, and Bettiol. Well, Bettiol.
And there's also Jan Horuk in there. They've got that 6 of the leading 7. There are 7 men there, in fact.
Bettiol, the 29-year-old, who was 13th in Rome and 4th behind Bourdin in the European Championships. Taniguchi and Shinohara, good side shot of them, and Sala. Mentioning earlier about Sala in the background there, twice the winner of the World Cup, including the first World Cup here in Japan in Hiroshima in 1985. And he was the man that broke away from this man in the Seoul Olympic Games in 1988, established what looked to be a winning lead at one stage. We thought he might bring home a gold medal for Djibouti, but it turned out to be bronze. Man on the right of screen we're talking about. So from the left, Chisalasi, Taniguchi, Shinohara, Huruk. Here's Shinohara, who, well, quite frankly, I don't know a lot about.
Well, no, and he's a late change in the Japanese team. In fact, he wasn't one of their original 3. One of their runners, I forget who at the moment, had to drop out through injury, and he's a replacement. And I should think he's absolutely delighted with the opportunity, and he's delighting, I'm sure, all the Japanese supporters as well, with a magnificent race here, because clearly he came in with much less credentials than Nakayama rather, and at best of 2 hours 12. Well, they're running outside that pace now, but they're running the equivalent of 2:08 in really cool conditions. So he wasn't one of the touted runners, but that's one of the fascinating things about the marathon, in fact, that you've got the mixture of the experience, the big favourites, and 1 or 2 men who usually join it and use a race like this to come through. And we'll hear a lot of him, I'm sure, more of him in the future.
Got a feeling, Peter, you may have replaced Mamura, who'd run 2:9:23 in Beppu this year.
That's the one.
The 4th fastest in the world this year. We've got 2 Japanese runners, or 3 in fact. in the fastest 4 this year, and only one of them running in this race, and that's Nakayama. One of them's been pre-selected for Barcelona Morishita, and Mamura was replaced by Futoshi Shinohara. We're just going through the names of the lead group, and if you have just joined us in Australia, the story for Steve Monaghetti is that he's off this lead group in, we think, 9th position, and very much out of the action at the moment if you're talking about gold medals, because it's going to come down to these 7 men. There are some surprises, but certainly Bourdin, Taniguchi and Sala came into this race, 3 of the 7, as the favourites, along with Steve Monaghetti and Nakayama. Nakayama has retired from Japan, their #1 runner. Not their fastest, but their #1 in terms of past performances. And we're not getting too far away from 35 kilometres and then 36 kilometres, where there is a significant rise in the race. Panful was able to get away towards the end of that rise, and well, I wonder if we'll see a break here from Bourdin. I wonder if that's when he'll tighten the screws, Peter, and try and really test these men.
I wouldn't be in the least surprised. I wouldn't be in the least surprised. Yes, he's a powerful runner, isn't he? But none of them in this group show any sign of weakness at present.
So that's the scene in Tokyo, World Championship Marathon. You're watching it live right around Australia on the 7 Network.
He didn't sustain it, but obviously just conserving his energy. And if he's taking up the running again, it may be that he is the strong man. He's going to push on once again.
So past 36K and still just over 6 kilometres to run in this World Championship Marathon. Galindo Bourdin, the bearded Italian, he stands head and shoulders above most of his rivals in stature and in many ways in performance in the major events. The Olympic champion. Now, Shinohara looking back there, and you can see Steve Spence has got this down to about 50 metres or 60 metres. It is a little deceiving looking at it from this angle, but he's certainly broken away from Castillo and Monaghetti, and he has made tremendous progress. So high excitement here in Tokyo.
Yes,
could have a tremendous finish. We've got it anyway with 7. Maybe it'll be 8 shortly.
Well, we certainly have. I mean, the women's marathon was close. We had, the leading 3 all on the track at the same time. We're going to have more than 3 on the track at the same time, I would expect, unless something dramatic happens, of course, very soon. But it looks to me most of those men still seem to be pretty full of running. And, well, could we have 7 men all on the track, or maybe even 8 if Steve Spence catches them up at the same time? What a finish that will be for the people assembled here in the stadium, waiting the runners. And they're only, what, well, less than 20 minutes away now from the finish of the race.
This uphill climb, Bourdin leading the way with the 2 Japanese runners surrounding him, Taniguchi and Shinohara. Still very much in the action, the pole, and also the Ethiopian and the man from Djibouti. Here's Steve Spence. It's tough to make up ground up this hill, but he has certainly made a run for it. And it's been one of the surprises of this World Championship, and let me tell you, there have been a few. And Steve Monaghetti in 10th position. He must be doing it hard, Peter. This is the worst thing that can happen to any leading marathoner. I mean, Steve's never had a poor marathon, and by his standards, this one is certainly not nearly his best. In fact, it'll be his worst result in a major championship.
A worst result, yes, but still a great run. He was up there with the best in the world for a long time. And what's got to him is what can get to anybody. We've seen many others get back are these conditions. This is no weather to run a marathon in, that be quite sure. 30 degrees temperature, 60% humidity. Okay, it could be worse than that, but nonetheless, it's terrible conditions, really. In fact, just thinking ahead to Atlanta when they're going to run the Olympic Games in 1996, I'm told it's usually 90 degrees Fahrenheit and 90% humidity most of the time.
Romy Taniguchi, who may be making another break for it here. In fact, he is. You can see that he's gone out to the right of the runners and has a 10 or 12 metre lead over Bourdin and Huruk of Poland. Taniguchi, 2:7:40, came into the race as the 3rd fastest man, one of 3 men who has broken 2:8. He did that in defeat in Beijing in 1988. And now Huruk, the first to move, which is very interesting. And look at Spence. He has, in fact, got within 20 metres of the group. I think Bettiol looked back and saw that the numbers were about to be 8. Bourdin is there, still comfortable. He hasn't hasn't panicked by any stretch of the imagination, and Sala, but the American, well, we talked about Frank Shorter, Bill Rogers, and Salazar. Well, suddenly we've got another man.
Well, I think the Americans are absolutely delighted because it's been such a long time since they had a top-class marathoner. But there's a pattern here, isn't there? For the second time, a break's been made by Taniguchi. And for the second time, the man to most swiftly close the gap, Jan Horuk of Poland. Also, when the gap first opened up at that original break, Shinohara of Japan went with Taniguchi. Shinohara not looking quite so good this time. He's still with that group, but he's a bit further back.
And I think the other man who's struggling at the moment is Salvatore Bettiol of Italy, who's just behind Shinohara. Here's Taniguchi with 5 kilometres to go in this World Championship marathon. Just got the feeling Bettiol is struggling a little at the end of this group. You see Spencer's running up alongside of him. Ethiopian still very much part of the action. Giselasi, who was the third Ethiopian, really, and brought in. Well, the Taniguchi really putting it in here. Sala has responded as he did earlier. Huruka's there, Shinohara's gone, and Bordin leading the second group. So even the Olympic champion under tremendous pressure here. I've said before he won't panic, and he hasn't. And Steve Spence has gone past Giselasi and past Bettiol, and he's moved very strongly.
The two Japanese there. The interesting thing about Spence is, has he expended all his energy to join this group, or has he got the strength to not only join them, but maybe even go past them? That will be an interesting test. But there's still these two Japanese. We were looking at Shinohara not being so good, but he's quickly, in fact, closed that gap. So he has joined his teammate Taniguchi. Jan Horuk of Pole, the taller figure there on the left-hand side. This uphill stretch here, the steepest bit. Ahmed Sala also looking good. The oldest man in the field at 35. Then a little gap, and Steve Spence still running strongly at the forefront of it. Bordin just tucking in behind him.
With Bettiol, the other Italian, and you, well, I was going to say, you would just wonder about Bordin at this very minute, but we're talking about Galindo Bordin and not anybody else, but he's 20 metres off them. And as Peter just mentioned, this is a steep part of this hill, and Giselasi very much gone now. The Ethiopian off the back, so we're down to 7.
Yeah, and Bordin has shown the ability to continue to reel in people, but what you have to question is whether he will have the speed at the finish, because that's what it's going to come down to. I think we're going to have a number of people in contention, and it could be some sprinting at the end there. Who's going to have the legs in them to do that? There's Giselasi of Ethiopia, who's was prominent for so long, but is now dropping back a bit, and Castillo with him.
Well, Castillo also has been a surprise packet here. He was off the lead group a long way away, and he's been able to work his way back. He's seen Spence go past him, and he now is also getting himself into a reasonable position.
Yeah, reasonable position, but I don't think he's in a position to challenge. I mean, you've got these 4 men, then there's the question of whether Spence, Bettiol and Bordin can narrow the gap on them. But these 4 all looking pretty strong.
And Taniguchi at the front, as he has been in those 2 decisive breaks. Shinohara just tucked in behind him, and Huruk and Sala. What an amazing athlete he is, Sala, the Army lieutenant. Was based in Paris for a long time. He's only won, well, I say only, he's won 4 marathons. He was a prolific fast runner. In the mid-80s, he went 4 inside 2:10. And now Bordin has gone past Spence. Bordin's changed positions with Spence, about 15 metres behind this lead group of 4. He has 4 inside 2:10, Sala, 2 inside 2:9 and 1 inside 2:8. So we've got, Peter, in this group of 4, we've got 2 of the 3 men that had broken 2:8 are right there. 2 of the 2:7 men. And Galindo Bordin, the great Italian, and Steve Spence, the surprising American, with Bettiol, the second Italian, chasing. Steve Moneghetti in 10th position, would be 300 or 400 metres behind this lead group. And we've got now, right at this moment, 4 kilometres to go in the marathon.
Yeah, and it's a tough man's race, isn't it? Just look at the ages of these runners. Shinohara, the youngest of them, at 29. Both Taniguchi and Huruk are 31, Sala are 35. Well, it certainly shows it's a pretty experienced man's race. Behind him, Bordin and Bettiol, also plenty of experience there. And Steve Spence, who's mostly made his name on the road running circuit in the US, won the Columbus Marathon last year in 2 hours 12, and he's up there with them too.
So for Bordin, this is the task that he faces. 25 metres, still not substantial, but he wouldn't want to be giving this group that sort of a start as they approach the stadium.
Well, it's not looking so good, as once again we're going to move away, and this man does look to have the strength, I have to say that. He's made all the decisive breaks, and the man who can make all the decisive breaks has to have the edge, and that's Taniguchi. Salah is the quickest to respond to him.
Well, he's covered most of the moves. There's been a pattern in this race, hasn't there? As we've illustrated with Taniguchi, Shinohara and Salah following quickly. And Hurok now looks back the pole, took a head count there, and it may be a sign that he's really starting to feel it and struggle. His performance has been quite outstanding, and Taniguchi is now really putting it in. We're at the top of this hill at 39. Shinohara and Hurok are finding it hard. There they are in 3rd and 4th place. Two of the outsiders in this race. This is the next group, and Bourdin has not responded to this stage. Spence and Bettiol with him. They're 20 or 30 metres behind the 3rd and 4th man, and look at the gap. Taniguchi is gone for home. It's a long way out, I know, but he's making the long journey, and he's decided to take it here and make his claim for a gold medal. Running in his home country in Japan in his first major championship at 31 years of age. And he's put a space in Salah of about 10 or 15 metres, and he has really worked them, Peter, up the hill. This is the tactics that Steve Monaghetti was going to employ had he been in the front group, and he must have had the same idea as Hiromi Taniguchi, because it's exactly what's unfolded here.
Well, this is the one where the strong man, the one who's best, does it, and it was Taniguchi who made the first break. It was Taniguchi who made the 3rd, and this may well be the decisive one. Salah doing his best to try to tag on, but unless Taniguchi fades, I think the rest of them are looking for the minor medals, and Taniguchi shows no sign of fading, and you can be quite sure he's going to get plenty of support along the way.
Well, he's going to be tired like everybody else at 39 kilometres, but
it's when you're tiredest, that's when you put in the kick, and that's when you destroy the other people.
Salah tried to respond. He certainly hasn't been completely dropped off, but look at Salah. He's now had a look back. I remember the last time I saw him do that was in a New York Marathon. Well, no, it wasn't. It was in the Olympic Games in '88. He saw Bourdin's figure and Wakahiri challenging him. So I've got the feeling that Salah might also be looking for a minor medal. And he's got a couple of those. He's got a 2nd placing at the World Championship 4 years ago, and then a 3rd placing in Seoul. But this man here, and there's Bourdin, and the fact that he's not leading Bettiol and Spence at this stage suggests that the great man will leave this race without a medal.
Yep, that's a very unusual occurrence, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. He's plodding along. That's all you can say.
Well, this man's sprinting, and there's a big difference, isn't there? I mean, he's really picked up the tempo. He's getting tremendous applause inside the stadium as they watch it on the big screen, and 120 metres behind the leader is this group. Bettiol of Italy, who's very much been in the shadow of the man behind him throughout their career, Bourdin. I think he'd love to take Bourdin's scalp here and beat him home, but Taniguchi has flown away. He looks back, still got another 9 or 10 minutes of running, or maybe a bit less than that now, because he really has picked it up. And the gap's substantial. It's out to 80 or 90 metres. And surely now, Peter, we're looking at the gold medalists in the World Championships.
I'm as near certain as you can be, with 39.5 kilometres into the race. 42.195 will be the completion. The Hiromi Taniguchi is really going for it, and he's opening up that gap on Salah, and he's looking terrific. Taniguchi, a man who's not contested the big championship marathons for quite a long time, since he got the silver medal in the Asian Games back in 1986, but he's a big race winner. He's won London, he's won Tokyo twice. He's run 2:07:40 when he was 2nd in Beijing in 1988. He's got all the credentials. He's the 7th fastest man of all time at the marathon, and Japan are going to be absolutely thrilled if and when he comes through to take the gold medal. And Ahmed Salah of Djibouti, another great man who may be on his way in for his 2nd successive World Championship silver medal.
Salah falling over in Rotterdam this year at the start, the race that Rob de Castella made his comeback in. And you can see Salah is really working very hard. Here's Shinohara in 3rd place. So will Japan come home with gold and bronze here? It would be very fitting for a country that bases its athletics very much around the marathon. They had a tremendous result in the women's marathon with 2 in the top 4. Silver and 4th placing, and here they may even go better with 1 and 3.
It just fits in very nicely, doesn't it? 1 and 3 in the men, 2 and 4 in the women, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Perfectly. So Taniguchi has really picked this up. It's been an extraordinary performance, really, when you consider just how hot and how tough this race has been. We've seen some of the great marathoners in the world go off the back. And we're getting towards 40 kilometres. In fact, we're there now at 2:08:16. Well, that's not a bad time for a marathon if you're running it in London or New York or Boston. It's pretty fast, but in fact, it's Steve Monaghetti's PB, personal best, that he ran in Berlin in 1990, but they've still got 2 kilometres to run, and Taniguchi about to sponge himself down. And he did go very early, Peter. He went on the hill, but there's no sign of him stopping at the moment, and you'd feel that the opposition is dispirited.
He's run a great race, really. He was with the leaders. He tested them a little way after the halfway stage. He tested them, and he found that only Shinohara and Huruk went with him. He was content to let the other people come back. He went again, tested them again, and only a few responded. And I think he knew then, because he was obviously feeling very good, that when he made a decisive break, he would get away. And that's exactly what's happened. When he made his decisive break, the third break that he did, this was the one that was for real, the one that he extended all the way to the finish. And it's a wonderful performance by Taniguchi, and all of Japan will be very, very proud of him. Let's forget about the time. It's slow by marathon standards, but there are very few marathons that are run in this sort of weather. There are very few marathons that are run with the temperature over 30 degrees Celsius and with high humidity to go with it.
Well, look at the face of the man who's on his way, seemingly, to a gold medal in this World Championship marathon. Previous 2 champions have come from Australia and Kenya in the World Championships. Rob De Castella and Douglas Wakahiri. And maybe, well, I shouldn't say this for him, but it wasn't the best sign for the Olympic Games the next year. Rob finishing 5th in Los Angeles, and Wakahiri running brilliantly in Seoul, but coming home with a silver medal. But Taniguchi, that split 16:09 up the hill. So you can see that he did pick it up. 16:37, 16:33, and really it should have been the slowest 5 kilometres of the race. And it was substantially quicker than the other 2.
Yeah, he's about to come into the stadium. I mean, I think Barcelona next year will be a different thing altogether. It'll be hot again there, of course, but of course you wonder how much a race like this will take out of anybody, how quickly they'll be able to come back from what they've pushed their body through here. And you don't necessarily say that this man Taniguchi is going to be a favourite for the Olympics or anything like that. This is his own personal triumph day. It could be this is the one great race that he'll have in his life now, because this will take a great deal out of him. And Steve Spence narrowing the gap here in 3rd place, and it's Steve Spence now into 3rd place, past Shinohara and Jan Huruk of Poland just behind them. And Spence is reaping the reward for running a sensible, slowly controlled race, and has been able to reel in the winning gap and is looking good. Huruk of Poland going with him. Shinohara behind him may not be able to sustain it, I think. Well, we could have a little bit of a burn-up for the bronze medal, but Steve Smith looking good. Ahmed Salah looks back. He was well clear in the silver medal spot. He still is, but he's, of course, naturally a little worried to see how fast anybody may be closing on him, because I don't think he's got a great deal left. Well, surely nobody can have very much left at this stage in the marathon. And Taniguchi, the sheer pain on his face, he's paying for it. But my word, he's not going to give up now. He's going to be determined, if any man ever was determined. It really hurts. You can see that. He's desperately in agony, and yet he's maintaining his cadence. His legs are doing the work. His mind has just got to concentrate hard on these closing stages.
Got a split for Steve Spence at 15 kilometres. He was 45 seconds behind the lead group even then. He probably was further behind at halfway. So it's been a tremendous comeback. But we're looking at Hiromi Taniguchi, the 31-year-old from Japan, who's on his way to a famous victory. And well, for any runner, for any marathoner, to win a major championship, it's got to be the ultimate. But when you add it to the fact that you've won it in your own country, well, what more could you ever ask for? And Taniguchi's certainly on his way to achieving both of those things here. We're over 2:12. We're looking at about 2:14.5, 2:15, and very shortly he'll be coming into the stadium. The last time we saw Steve Monaghetti, he was in 10th position. And the crowd in the stadium are really roaring him on.
Here he comes. There's going to be a roar any minute when he enters the stadium, coming up the little ramp to the stadium now. That's the last uphill incline of this race, and then it's the flat. It's 400 meters plus the length of the straight to run when he comes in.
Well, there'll be a mighty roar in a moment. Probably 15,000 people in the stadium. It's a huge stadium, and it's going to look reasonably empty, but look at the crowds outside, and they're going to give this man a hero's welcome as he runs through the tunnel and about to come into our view. Almost there, Taniguchi, with one lap of the stadium to run before he wins the gold medal in the World Championships. So Hiromi Taniguchi, 500 metres away now from the gold medal. And the battle will be on for second, third. And Sala was in second placing, but Spence was closing, so we could still have some high drama for silver and bronze. Just one lap remaining. Hiromi Taniguchi looks back, sees Sala just coming into the stadium now. 200 metres behind him. So will Sala finish with the silver medal as he did in Rome 4 years ago? It certainly looks like it, because he's well in front of Spence. And Taniguchi in the back straight. Look at the time. When you consider the fastest this man's run is 2:7:40, and yet this is his greatest victory. It does say something about the conditions in Tokyo today and the pressure of a major world championship. Spence is on the track, 100 metres behind Sala. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and then Furyk and Shinohara are on the track, and so is Bettiol. We have 6 men on the track together. A tremendous scene here in the stadium. And maybe Bourdin will also get in before Taniguchi finishes. Well, he was a hero in Japan before this race. Fancy what he's going to be like now. The 31-year-old celebrating. And we do have a 7th man on the track. It's Castillo. But Hiromi Taniguchi will win the World Championship for Japan in a time of around 2:15. It's been a superlative, magnificent performance. 2:14.56. Taniguchi for Japan, the gold medal. It's what everybody in Tokyo has been looking forward to all week, that a Japanese runner could come through and win the gold medal, and it's happened. Magnificent performance. And here's Sala, bronze medalist in Seoul at the Olympics in 1988 and silver medalist in Rome, winner of 2 World Cups and silver again. 35 years of age. 2:15.25 for Sala. And the 3rd man home, the big surprise amongst the big 3, is Steve Spence of the United States, 2:15.35. Now, 4th place also a surprise. Jan Hurek of Poland, a tremendous performance. So the Poles, who won the women's marathon with Panfil, get a great result here. Here's the 2nd of the Japanese, Shinohara, in 5th place. And Bettiol coming home in 6th place. You can see what a competitive race this was, with 6 men within 1 minute of the winner. Exactly a minute apart. We'll make it 61 seconds apart from Bettiol. 7th man coming home is Castillo. And there's Taniguchi rejoicing with the crowd here in the stadium. Well, we said Castillo, Peter, would be happy with 2:10.47 if we could give it to him. Well, he would have won by 5 minutes if he had. He finishes in 7th place. Bourdin is on the track, the Olympic champion, and he will finish 8th, which will be his lowest place finish in a major championship.
Yes, and desperately tired man. Well, they're all desperately tired men, but of course the joy of winning can sometimes put a spring back into your step, which you wouldn't have believed possible. That is the case with Hiromi Taniguchi.
What a great moment for him, and for the sport here in Japan, as Bourdin can hardly lift his legs, the Olympic champion. 3rd in Rome in the World Championships 4 years ago, twice the European champion. And today, struggling home in 8th place. Now, we have a 9th man on the track, Giselasi of Ethiopia. There's Bourdin, 2:17.02. Exactly 3 minutes slower than he ran in Yugoslavia last year when he won the European title. Well, Giselasi's on the track, the Ethiopian, and he can hardly lift his legs, and we're hoping that Steve Moneghetti's not too far behind.
It's amazing, isn't it? Bourdin finishing 2.5 minutes behind Taniguchi, and yet he was together with them until, what, about 1 hour 50 into the race. Just shows how much you can lose in the last few stages of a race.
Well, Steve Moneghetti, we haven't got pictures of him, but he's in the stadium in 11th position as Taniguchi is rejoicing.
Yeah, just ahead of him, Konrad Dobler of Germany coming in 10th place. He was tailed off earlier, but Steve Moneghetti very bravely has stuck out the course, and any man who finishes a marathon in these conditions, and remember it's now over 30 degrees Celsius, I'm sure it must be getting hotter and hotter by the minute, high humidity as well, no conditions ready to run a marathon, so let's hand it to a very, very great effort here by Taniguchi, and indeed all these finishes.
So 1 and 5 on the screen at the moment. Taniguchi and Shinohara, the 2 from Japan. Bourdin, the Olympic champion and one of the favourites 8. The other Japanese runner, Nakayama, Well, he won't receive much solace from this result, I'm sure, because he had to retire. And here's Jasalasi, who's finishing in 9th place from Ethiopia. His best before today was 2:12.05. And Steve Monaghetti has 200 metres to run in 11th place. So we'll bring Steve in. But the result here is that Taniguchi has the gold medal for Japan, Sala the silver for Djibouti, and Spence the bronze for the United States. Here's Dobler of Germany, really the third of the Germans, who was 11th in London earlier this year in the World Cup. And he goes one place better here and a much more significant result in much slower time in 10th place. And about 80 metres behind him is our own Steve Monaghetti, the boy from Ballarat. It wasn't his day today, but it's been a brave performance. He stuck it out. Dobler, you can see how happy he is with finishing 10th. And here's Monas. Well, it's been tough. Really tough these last 15 or 20 kilometres. But in typical Monaghetti style, he's seen it through. 2:19.17 for 11th place for Steve Monaghetti. Well, it's been a hard day. So we leave you in Tokyo. And the news, well, it's not a victory for Australia. It's a victory for Japan in the marathon, for Hiromi Taniguchi, the gold medalist from these World Championships, as we go back to the studio and Sandy...